All right. I think we're good, huh? All right, let me just check real quick on YouTube. See if see. Can you hear me there? Yeah. All right. See. All right. I think we're good, huh? All right, let me just check real Okay. Good. You guys can hear me well. All right. So today I'm basically going to talk about some really great 9/11 truth resources, websites and stuff that you're not going to see really anywhere else. Even people that you know post to be you know experts on 9/11 truth that cut across the fluff and give you what others don't. No, this is real deep stuff, um, and it's going to benefit you and everyone you share it with. And then after that, um, I'm going to show some of what I call the uh, Organon, which is basically the principles that I use for my research, and it's the stuff I've been doing essentially this whole year, and a little bit more. So about 18, maybe 18 months, I don't know. But I've been working on that. And anyway, and we'll explore that. And so okay. So first, uh, we're going to look at three websites and they're not definitely not the only three, but they're some of the best. There is one website I'll give an honorable mention to, which is the 9/11 consensus panel. Um, they've put together a lot of points that are basically points against the official story with very good uh, summary of evidence and showing what the original what the official story says, and then what the best evidence says, and so on and so forth. So that gets an honorable mention. But first, we're going to look at a um, a YouTube channel called 9/11 Physics and Reason. And this channel is run by a man named John Cole. He's an engineer, PE, licensed engineer, who has a quite the backyard, and uses it to show off these different experiments, or not to show off, but to do these different experiments, which prove 9/11. They're lying about certain aspects. Let's say about the thermite or about gravity. So let me pull this up here. I remember when someone gave me, he said, you should buy a mechanical keyboard. And I was like, what's that? And it's like, just make sure you get one. And man, I forget which one this was. If it's red or if it's brown, I forget. But it's great. It's so subtle. At first, I was like, really? It doesn't seem like much. But now I love typing. It's the way it feels. Anyway, uh, I gotta go to YouTube themselves. I can't believe that. All right, we're almost there, ladies and gentlemen. Here we are. So let me put this up here. Ready? Okay. So this is John Cole's channel, and like I said, an absolute beautiful website. Um, so let's see one of his newest videos, which looks at the spire. So he has a great besides doing experiments, he has this brilliant which I think is the most brilliant way of dismantling another argument, is using something called reductio ad absurdum, and that's when you take the article. I'm sorry, the article. You take their point for granted. You say, yeah, it is the case. And then you show how, given that, if it were true, it would lead to this ridiculous conclusion, you know. So, if you, for instance, if someone says, no such thing as gravity, and then you show, well, if that were the case, things wouldn't fall to the earth so rapidly, things would be floating around or whatever. So, anyway, so he has that style, and it's great because, again, it's not really arguing against the argument as much as it's showing that even if it were true, there's a problem with it. It's powerful. But anyway, let's look at this.
I want to look at the roof. This is what I call the roof versus...
By the way, most of his videos are produced, but this is one of the most recent ones he's had. And we'll look at the others in a bit.
The spire, and I want to look at a single column on that spire. By the way, this central area here is called the spire. So we hear me call the core columns or the spire. This is just a picture, a still picture. This happens to be in front of another building. It's not tied to this building. And this spire, or this central core columns, which again stood for 15 seconds after the building came down, are very straight, and you can see all the connections from all the floors. The floor spacing, I'm sure you can correct me on this one, they were probably about 12 or 14 foot spacings out there.
12 feet.
12 foot spacings. Okay, so these are all the connections, and inside this area here ran the elevators. And there's capacity equations that tell you that the strength of a column is dependent upon how long the column is, called its effective length, and whether it's connected on both sides. Well, this column here, when it was built, had connections every 12 feet, right, going up. And now it's just standing there. It's just slightly wavering, but notice it's not buckled. Now this column is much, much, much longer. Matter of fact, I estimate it's roughly maybe about 100 feet long if you compare with these floors of this building over here. Now you have a long, thin column that's fixed at the bottom and free at the top. Well, I can tell you, when you have a long, free column like that, that's much longer, that the capacity, the downward load on that column is much less and not more than its original design strength, because it was designed to be connected all through here. So any downward force from a falling top block or a pancake floor had to be imposed less on this column and not more than its design strength, or we would have seen this thing buckled. And by the way, there's some other ones here too. So the force during the collapse process on this column to allow it to be straight like that and not buckled was less and not more. In other words, if you take a toothpick, okay, there I am holding a toothpick, and you try to drop a plate through the toothpick, well, obviously that toothpick cannot remain straight and the plate fall through it. Something's got to give. Either the toothpick's got to give, and in our case, the toothpick didn't give, or the plate's got to give in order to get down through that toothpick.
Well, in the South Tower, there were 35 or so plates all together.
Right.
So something happened to them to get through that toothpick, I think. Right.
So since the upper floors cannot fall through the standing spire core column, the roof trusses, this whole roof, these things are an acre in size, that whole roof and this hat truss, we talked about the hat truss earlier, and all the floors below it had to have been fragmented and or propelled laterally, that lateral motion, in order to pass through this standing spire without buckling, and it didn't buckle. So we know all the material above had to impose, whatever force hit that was much less than the design there. It had to have been blown outward. And that explains why the first volume to be destroyed was the upper block. It also explains why we can't see that upper block after the first 2 or 3 seconds. It's gone. They were destroyed and blown outward before they ever got down to those lower inner core columns. And those lower inner core columns, that were around, I think, around the 60th floor roughly. So they had to have been destroyed or that spire would have buckled. Well, not only is the crush down, crush up theory wrong because it doesn't match experiment, nor does it follow Newton's laws, the pancake theory has to be wrong. In fact, all gravitational collapse theories are wrong. Whatever theory you come up with, if it's just gravity alone, it's got to be wrong. Or the columns that we observed in those standing spire would have buckled. Something would have bent. It didn't. It stood straight. Now, there's many other reasons why all gravity collapse theories are wrong. The missing jolt, all kinds of other reasons. But this is just a direct observation. It doesn't take any equations or any math to see it, that it has to be wrong. The spire, that standing spire, is the Achilles heel of all gravitational collapse theories, or it would have buckled and bent, and it didn't. It's also the Achilles heel for the DEW, the mini nuke, and the aluminum sprinkler theories too, because again, that aluminum was long gone by the time we saw this.
Yeah, so let's look another one real quick. Should we look at this one? Or... Okay, yeah, let's look at this one. So if you remember, maybe I'm showing my age. Yes, quite a bit long ago, 7 years ago, I guess. There was this blacksmith who went viral for, supposedly debunking 9/11 truth with, in this blacksmith shop or whatever it's called. And again, engineer here, John Colt, does a brilliant takedown of this. Low budget, brilliant takedown. Let's look at it.
There are many unanswered questions about the destruction of the 3 skyscrapers on 9/11. One has to do with the intense heat, and another, the uniform downward acceleration. There's plenty of evidence of temperatures high enough to melt steel, including molten spheres of iron, melted steel full of holes in the FEMA report, melted beams seen by NIST, melted handguns in the museum, fused elements of steel and concrete, and many eyewitness accounts.
You'd get down below and you'd see molten steel running down the channel rails.
So the question is, what heat melted that steel? Office fires and jet fuel can't melt steel beams. But rather than addressing the evidence, most ignore or dismiss it.
Jet fuel melting steel beams, they don't have to melt them, guys. They don't have to melt anything.
Guys.
They don't have to liquefy steel, but you can bend steel with your bare hands if it gets over like 1800 degrees. That's not very hot in the realm of, fire, especially when fueled by kerosene from jet fuel. I mean, it can compromise the integrity of any structure. Trust me.
He's wrong.
Question.
The steel did melt. So the question remains, where did the heat come from? And any steel compromise would be up where the fires were, sagging down, but not suddenly exploding outward in a shower of dust. Others have posted experiments proving the obvious, that if you heat steel red hot, it gets very weak.
So I am taking time out of my busy day to try to put to rest one of the more moronic things I have seen on the internet lately, and that's saying something. Through my Facebook feed, I saw yet again that old tired argument, that question. Jet fuel only burns at 1500 degrees, and since steel melts at 2700 degrees, 9/11 was a conspiracy. I am so sick and tired of this argument. I put this in the L. Now watch this. I'm going to take my pinky finger, half-inch solid steel. Check it out. It's a freaking noodle. Your argument is invalid. Get over it. Find a job.
Most people, and certainly thousands of architects and engineers, already knew this. So what can we learn from his experiment if we apply it to the towers on 9/11? Well, if all the steel in the tower lobby was red hot, and there was a horizontal force like a strong wind, the towers should have tipped over. But where was the heat? It was way up on the upper floors. The lower floors remained stone cold and very strong as the people evacuated. And how did the towers fall? The upper floors accelerated down into the larger, cold, and stronger structure below. And the only force, we are told, that caused this remarkable motion was downward from gravity alone. But what happened when the blacksmith applied a downward force?
It's very hot, but not melted. Obviously, it is not melted.
the steel rod didn't accelerate down like the top of the towers. And he's right. Obviously, it's not melted. But that's what the saying, jet fuel can't melt steel beams, is all about. Those fires couldn't have melted that steel. I'm not a blacksmith, but I can heat steel just as hot. Let's conduct a more realistic experiment by heating a rod about where the heat really was in the towers, and see if the top...
I just want to say real quick that that's iron coming out, not aluminum. Aluminum wouldn't be red like that in the daylight. It would be silvery. So yeah, it's iron.
Accelerates down by gravity alone.
Cool, man, with the shape.
Obviously, the top doesn't accelerate down by gravity alone, even if I hammer it down. People don't understand the jet fuel meme and think suddenly they alone have solved the problem of the tower's fall.
But if you hold this up as a reason for conspiracy, you are an idiot.
I might be, but these guys who were there are not. Research and understand the issues, and then try to find any realistic experiment using steel and concrete that demonstrates the destruction of those towers by fire and gravity alone. But you won't, because it's impossible, which is why nobody, no university, no engineers, NIST, FEMA, no one, has been able to provide any real experiment that demonstrates the motions observed, and why none of the official investigations were ever able to address these simple, unanswered questions. And while he may not care,
if it was conspiracy, I do not care.
Some of us do care about all those that were murdered when the towers were intentionally blown up.
Let's look at one of his experiments. By the way, this we're not going to look at this video, but this video is a brilliant video, again, using the ad absurdum, saying, well, if it's true that fire can just bring down skyscrapers like that, you know, like in Building 7, then, you know, why are we allowing firefighters to go into buildings, like, you know, unaided when they could just immediately just collapse? Or why are we allowing, why haven't insurance companies change their rates? Because, you know, now an ordinary fire, office fire, can bring down a building to its footprint. So, you know, it's a great ad absurdum argument there. Let's see, great thermite debate. Let me see. Yeah, it's the great thermite debate. It's a little long, but it's probably its best one. It's like almost 5 million views on it.
The Twin Towers had a perimeter of steel panels hoisted up and bolted into place. Each panel had 3 box columns about 14 inches square, cross-connected by spandrel plates. After the plane hit, the fires were burning out and cooling down.
The flames on the south tower, which appear to be getting lesser and lesser, is where the smoke is getting progressively lighter and wider, indicating that the fire officials are getting closer to putting this fire out.
But then, about 7 minutes before its final destruction, almost an hour after the plane hit, molten metal was seen coming out of the northeast corner near the 80th floor. The red-yellow metal poured from the tower along with a shower of sparks, and looked like steel in a foundry. And there were many eyewitnesses that described molten steel.
You'd get down below and you'd see molten steel running down the channel rails.
Later, we learned of very small spheres of iron found all through the dust. That iron must have been molten, allowing surface tension to pull it into those spheres. NASA took photos indicating very high temperatures days after the event, and Firewise professors were perplexed by melting of steel beams. And so we have direct video evidence, eyewitness accounts, forensic evidence, photographic evidence, intangible evidence, all corroborating temperatures high enough to melt steel. The media told us the intense fire, more than the impact, caused the towers to collapse. It melted the structural steel. But there's a problem. Office and open-air jet fuel fires cannot melt steel. The National Institute of Standards and Technology said that the maximum air temperatures was about 1,800 degrees or 1,000 degrees colder than what's needed to melt steel. So what can melt steel and explain all the evidence? Independent scientists began to piece that evidence together, and they suggested some type of thermitic material must have been used as part of the tower's demolition. Thermite is a mix of iron oxide and aluminum, and thermate is a mix of thermite, barium nitrate, and sulfur. But NIST ignored much of the evidence of molten iron or steel. They provided their own theory for that yellow metal pouring from the tower. NIST understood that molten aluminum is silver, not red-yellow. So NIST developed a theory to explain the color issue, stating, the molten metal was very likely mixed with large amount of hot, partially burned solid organic materials, such as furniture, carpet, partitions, and computers, which can display an orange glow much like the logs burning in a fireplace. But there's a problem. Office materials like furniture, carpet, partitions, and computers are less dense and won't mix. They'll float on molten aluminum, like this coin on liquid mercury, and then burn off at those temperatures. And steel at those temperatures won't melt and would sink, and therefore won't mix with the molten aluminum. NIST never conducted any experiments to confirm their theory, but others did. Dr. Stephen Jones proved the NIST molten aluminum and furniture mix theory wrong. Then an independent peer-reviewed report was published which found explosive red-gray chips all through the dust and positively identified as nanothermite or superthermite. Unlike conventional thermite, this stuff is a very high-tech explosive and confirmed what the independent scientists had been saying all along. But NIST refused to test for explosives or its residue and ignored standards such as NFPA 921 guidelines. The corporate media attacked all the evidence of thermitic material found. Let's watch.
If thermite melts through this steel column, the theory of a thermite-controlled demolition may have some validity. While the truthers insist that more explosive super thermite could have been used in the tower demolitions, testing conventional thermite can illuminate this physical process and answer a simple question. Can thermite of any type burn through steel beams? Despite 175 pounds of thermite packed around the steel column, it remained undamaged.
Mythbusters says, the events of 9/11 will not be allowed to be debated and discussed. And they barely managed to melt through the roof of a car with a half a ton of thermite. And the debunking websites say, the thermite would have also needed to cut sideways. Not an easy feat for thermite. You see, it's a powder which burns chaotically. Maybe with some device, but no working device has been proven to me to work to cut a vertical column. So we are led to believe that thermitic material cannot melt steel, cut steel horizontally or vertically, and would take massive amounts to do any real damage. So who's right in this great thermite debate? NIST and the media? Or the independent researchers and scientists who stand nothing to gain? It's time we conduct our own experiments to answer these questions. Can thermitic material melt steel? Can it cut horizontally or vertically? And does it take massive quantities to do any real damage? Many wide-flange beams were also used in the construction of the towers, connected in a variety of ways. Could thermite cut or weaken such a connection? Using the same beam from my eutectic steel video and another 12-inch beam, I proceeded to make a double-angle welded connection,
That's a great video,
which I set up on some 8-inch
The
concrete
eutectic steel.
slabs. I could not obtain nanothermite, so I made small quantities of old-fashioned thermate, which is not considered an explosive, with ingredients that are legal and readily available. Thermate is difficult to ignite, and ordinary fuse is not hot enough. But a magnesium strip, which burns white hot, will ignite the thermate, giving off heat and white smoke. NIST mentions bright white flames. Almost immediately, a bright spot appeared at the top of the window on the 80th floor. An unusual flame is visible within this fire. The upper photograph of a very bright white flame stands out. And let's listen to an eyewitness who was there.
I was on the 81st floor. Tell me what you saw and heard. It just, I had 40 people in there, just an explosion. There's a light flash out my window, my whole doorway to entrance to my office blew open.
Could these white flashes be some sort of igniter for the thermitic material? In addition to giving off heat and white smoke, thermate produces lots of small spheres of iron. These iron spheres are a natural byproduct of thermate and not from any steel. Just like those iron spheres found all through the dust. I'm an engineer who designs and builds things, and I'm certainly no explosive expert. My first problem was to find a container that could hold the thermate long enough to melt the steel while not melting itself. I didn't think that steel would work as a container, so I had to improvise using some normal roof tile that I cut in half. I then had to devise a way to hold it against the connection. I used strong magnets and a spring tooth from a hay rake to press 5 pounds of thermate on each side of the double angle connection. I lit the thermate. And it did absolutely nothing to the steel connection. Maybe thermate cannot melt steel, and maybe National Geographic was right. But the steel did not melt, meaning that perhaps a container could be made out of steel after all. Using an ordinary steel box tube, I had a slot milled along one edge. Welding the bottom and using clamps on the top to hold the powdered thermate in, I bolted it to a steel beam vertically. I called this device my thermitic box cutter. With only 1.5 pounds of thermate, or less than 1/100th of what the National Geographic experts used for their experiment. Not only was I able to melt steel, but it also sliced a vertical cut. So I made a slightly larger thermitic box cutter and used 2 3/8 bolts drilled and tapped on one side of the connection. It only took a slight twist to break it completely off. I noticed as the thermate burned, it tended to lose its cutting power, perhaps because it could expand into the area where the box cutter previously burned. So I built a piston-driven box cutter using a compressed car hatch piston. I added sheets of tungsten to minimize the burnout and allow the piston to slide better. I then bolted my contraption to the flange of the column and ignited the white-hot magnesium. It appears that not only can thermate melt steel, but it can also cut vertical columns. So why bother to use incendiaries like thermate and not high explosives? I think it's all about keeping things quiet before the main event. Using thermate may take longer to weaken such large columns in the towers, which may be why we see the molten steel several minutes before its final destruction. Here is less than 1 3/4 pounds of thermate, or 1/100th of what National Geographic used, quietly burning. And here is less than 4 pounds of thermate focused on the web of a wide flange. Which can also be set up on a vertical column. The web was reduced in thickness, with gaping holes, thinned to almost razor sharpness, with a Swiss cheese appearance. NIST rarely mentioned explosions except to say that they didn't exist. Instead, they used the politically correct terms, pressure pulses and dust puffs. Repeated pressure pulses. The sources for the pressure pulses and/or dust puffs are unknown. The series of pressure pulses. Perhaps we are seeing a pressure pulse in this video. Rather than using a mechanical piston to maintain volume, I segmented my box cutter with steel plates hoping to get a more uniform burn, but got some unexpected results. Can thermate make pressure pulses and/or dust puffs? I guess it can. But why waste all that thermate and energy cutting the columns? Why not attack the weakest areas instead? Can thermate cut bolts? I guess it can. But what if just the head of the bolt is exposed rather than the nut and the threads? Can thermite be configured to cut just the bolt head? I guess it can. And without any evidence on the other side. I don't think that something like my piston-driven box cutter was bolted to the office walls, or trash bags full of thermite used. It's more likely that any pre-weakening thermitic material were hidden inside the perimeter box columns. I had a replica of a segment of the WTC box columns made up. And like the Trade Center iron workers, I bolted the segments together. And made 2 sets of my 2 bolt blasters, placing them in the access hole. Let's listen to another eyewitness.
Like, it sounded like gunfire, bang, 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 and then all of a sudden, 3 big explosions.
Is it even possible that thermite could do this? I guess it is. I made a 4-sided box cutter split in 2 pieces so they could be inserted inside the column. I held it up on the burnt-out bolt blasters and thought I could hold it down with magnets. Let's see what happens. I think my box cutter blew about 30 feet up, consuming valuable energy and trimming my tree in the process. Nevertheless, the inside of the column was cut about 3/4 of the way through. Were thermitic devices or maybe explosive nanothermite sprayed inside those box columns? I'm not sure. And I'm not sure why this handhold is so large. Or why the side of this box column looks like it's blown outward. Or why 3 columns have a more intense glow, followed by 6 columns that don't, followed by another 3 that do. But I have an idea. But I do know that it's impossible for jet fuel or an office fire to melt steel or iron, which means the official story is wrong. Yet despite all the overwhelming evidence of explosions in molten steel, some people will still believe that this is aluminum and believe Building 7 fell naturally from an office fire. But those people will believe anything. Meanwhile, the government lies while the media hides the truth about 9/11.
Can thermite of any type burn through steel beams?
I guess it can. Isn't it time we use physical science rather than political science to investigate 9/11?
Yeah, we're going to look at one more because it's the eutectic formations. And again, it's just good, hard fucking science. Eutectic formations.
World Trade Center 7 was a 47-story steel skyscraper that housed numerous government agencies, including the Securities and Exchange Commission and the CIA. It had some office fires, particularly on the SEC floors, where many key Enron and WorldCom files were lost. No other steel skyscraper has ever collapsed due to fire, yet remarkably, late on September 11th, it fell straight down at near free-fall acceleration for almost 100 feet, even though no airplane ever hit it. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, was tasked with solving this most amazing collapse. One unique piece of steel was found by Professor Jonathan Barnett, a fire protection engineer. He found a 1-inch thick steel column from World Trade Center 7 reduced to a 1/2-inch thickness with gaping holes, curled like a paper scroll, thin to almost razor sharpness with a Swiss cheese appearance. And Professors Biederman and Sisson of Worcester Polytech confirmed the presence of eutectic formations on the steel. The Swiss cheese appearance shocked all of the fire-wise professors, who expected to see distortion and bending, but not holes. And the New York Times called these findings perhaps the deepest mystery uncovered in the investigation. FEMA conducted a preliminary building performance study in 2002, In an Appendix C of their report, they mention the mysterious eutectic mixture that attacked this steel. The severe corrosion and subsequent erosion of the samples are a very unusual event. No clear explanation for the source of the sulfur has been identified. So what is a eutectic mixture? It's an alloy or mixture whose melting point is lower than that of any other alloy or mixture of the same ingredients. As the sulfur content of iron oxide increases, the melting point decreases. So the problem is, what is the source of the sulfur that causes steel to look like Swiss cheese? There are two primary theories. The mainstream explanation is that the source of the sulfur was from normal building materials found in the rubble. In 2006, Frank Greening prepared a report outlining potential sources of sulfur. Dr. Greening identified the following major potential sources of sulfur: gypsum wallboard, diesel fuel oil, and molten aluminum reactions with gypsum. Mainstream media, such as movies, have said the sulfur came from masses of gypsum wallboard that was pulverized and burned in the fires. But independent scientists have developed their own studies that suggest other sources for the sulfur in the eutectic mixture. Specifically, various incendiaries, including thermate, was a contributing cause of the intergranular melting. The main chemical reaction in thermate is the same as thermite, but it also contains sulfur. Sulfur generates a eutectic system when molten thermate interacts with iron or steel, lowering the melting point of iron. But scientists on both sides wanted NIST to address this critical evidence in their final World Trade Center 7 report. Professor Jones said NIST should do an easy experiment in the presence of gypsum and then test whether sulfur has entered the steel. And Dr. Greening wisely wrote at the end of his report, by way of verifying these conclusions, it is suggested that NIST fire tests should be repeated using more realistic environments that include shredded aluminum alloy 2024, crushed concrete and gypsum, water, rusted steel, aviation fuel, plastics, etc. And FEMA said, a detailed study into the mechanism of this phenomenon is needed to determine what risk, if any, is presented to existing steel structures exposed to severe and long-burning fires. And Ryan Mackey wrote, at the time of writing, NIST has not yet issued its report on WTC 7. It may and should address this issue in the final report. And even NIST said that their report would address all major recommendations contained in the FEMA report. Unfortunately, NIST did not address this issue in their WTC 7 final report, nor conduct any experiments as suggested by Dr. Greening to verify the gypsum board hypothesis. So how can we tell who is not correct? We need to conduct an experiment, the arbitrator of opposing hypothesis. I used a W12 by 50 wide flange beam, which has thinner flanges than the original steel used in WTC 7. Using my oxyacetylene torch, I cut 2 holes in the flange so I could lift the completed assembly. I then placed gypsum board on the top and bottom flanges and subdivided the space in the web with multiple thicknesses of gypsum board. Gypsum board was crushed, and on one side dry chunks of gypsum was placed, while on the other side, gypsum that was soaked in a bucket of rainwater was used. Some concrete was crushed, and on the other side of the wide flange, a mixture of gypsum board, crushed concrete, and aluminum scraps, some from an airplane, steel scraps, and plastic was mixed in. About a gallon of diesel fuel was also added to the mix. A drywall lid with holes covered the side. And the entire setup was wrapped with wire lath and fence to help keep all the material contained and close to the wide flange. Plenty of burned material was collected, and the piece moved in, set in place on some old bank and financial statements, ready for the next day's experiment. Around 8 the next morning, in memory of those Enron files, I lit the bank statements to start the experiment. A rather robust fire soon enveloped. As the fire grew, additional fuel had to be constantly added. More and more piles of brush was added to build a good base for the larger logs that would be added later in the day. All morning long and part of the afternoon, the fire was fed with more and more fuel, including brush, trimmings, and some furniture and door panels were also added. After all the piles of brush were finally consumed, entire loader buckets of larger logs were added. The inferno burned all throughout the day, reaching temperatures that could easily melt aluminum cans and aluminum gutters. The fire blazed throughout the night, bringing the temperatures high enough to make the wide flange beam glow red. The fire burned for over 24 hours, and the coals lasted for another full day. By midweek, the fire was cool enough to remove the test piece. The ashes were raked off, and the test piece lifted out for observation. The wire lath and fencing was clipped off, and the gypsum removed. For the most part, all the aluminum scrap was gone, with the exception of a few small blobs. The steel beam did not have any holes whatsoever. In fact, it was still quite solid and sound. The aluminum, concrete, drywall, diesel fuel, and building materials did not cause any intergranular melting. So, if the concrete, drywall, aluminum, and diesel fuel did not cause the intergranular melting and sulfidation, then some uncommon substance that is not normally found in buildings must have caused it. And that uncommon substance must have been inside the structure before their destruction. Most people cannot accept the implications of the science behind 9/11 and think I must be wrong. So if you think I'm wrong, prove me wrong by experiment. But remember, there may be a reason why diesel storage tanks don't look like Swiss cheese, and why drywall is placed directly on steel stud framing and structural steel for fire insulation, and a reason why those fire-wise professors were so perplexed. And even though the fire-wise professors, FEMA, Mr. Mackey, and Dr. Greening all suggested that NIST should test and investigate to find the source of the sulfur, there is a reason why NIST ignored all their advice and never conducted any experiments or found that source of sulfur to solve this deepest of mysteries. Perhaps NIST knew the most logical cause of the sulfidation of the steel is from some type of thermitic reaction because it matches all other evidence, such as the molten steel or iron flowing out the side of the tower well before its collapse, the iron spheroids found in the dust, which is a direct byproduct of a thermitic reaction, the NASA thermal images of the rubble piles indicating very high temperatures days after the event that can be caused by ongoing thermitic chemical reactions, and the high-tech explosive nanothermite found all through the dust. And, of course, the fact that the remarkable collapse, supposedly from a new phenomenon called thermal expansion due to an office fire, looks exactly like a controlled demolition. The murder of thousands on 9/11 wasn't considered a crime, and therefore never investigated as a crime, which may be why so much forensic evidence is ignored, such as the iron microspheres and the explosive nanothermite found in the dust, and that mysterious eutectic steel. Don't they deserve some justice?
That's absolutely right. I want to see if I can get the channel straight from YouTube. Nope. So this is created by a few people, including John Cole, people like David Chandler, and what's really what I like about this site the most is they have shown very detailedly that what hit the Pentagon was an aircraft that was most likely Flight 77, and they're just so thorough on that. And that doesn't mean there's not a problem. I mean, the fact that anything is hitting the Pentagon, anything gets closer. I mean, and then we think about Norman Mineta, his testimony about Cheney putting orders to not shoot down the planes coming in, which is scary to think that orders like that could exist. But so this as you can see on the top here, David Chandler, John Cole, who we just looked at, Wayne Costi, who R.I.P., Stephen Jones, who was mentioned in one of the videos before, Francis Sure, Frank Leggy, or no, I think no, I'm sorry, not R.I.P. Wait, no, well he's alive still. I'm sorry, Frank Leggy has died. Yes. Um, Penny Little, no. So let's look at David Chandler. He was the guy who calculated how fast the I-beams were flying sideways, and basically about 60 miles per hour. These like two-story sections of I-beam of steel, and doing the calculations, we're talking about the force that would, the same amount of force laterally, which is in gravity, the same amount of force that would shoot a 200-pound cannonball 3 miles through the air. I mean, that's not gravity, you know. So he's done lots of good stuff. And he doesn't care where the evidence leads him. So when the evidence led him to a plane, most likely Flight 77 hitting the Pentagon, he didn't shy down from it just because everyone else, or not everyone, but a lot of people in the 9/11 truth community believed that it was a missile or some other phenomenon. And I remember when I brought it up to people, when I was part of a Ground Zero street action team, people they didn't dismiss it. They just kind of took it, say, okay, all right, we'll look into it, and I never heard about it again from them. So it wasn't like they dismissed it outright, but it was, you know, they didn't want to really deal with it, and that's sad. But anyway, so he's not like that at all. As you can see, his background is in he has a physics bachelor's degree in physics, and he has a master's degree in mathematical physics. And the only reason why he didn't get his PhD was because he loves teaching. So that's a good guy right there. That's a guy who is not trying to climb up the careerist academic ladder. This is someone who truly loves knowledge. And anyway, and so we're gonna look into him a little bit more. But as we see, this John Cole. We remember John Cole. We saw some of his videos before. You'll see him here, his talks. Remember that? Delves into details, right? One of his first 9/11 experiments. Steve Jones, the PhD physicist, nuclear physicist from Brigham Young University. Frank Leggy, who was a PhD in chemistry, RIP. Done a lot of good research. Was also part of the team that found the nanothermite in 2009. Here he is debunking the debunkers, basically people who said, "Oh, that those red and gray chips were just primer paint," or it's just it's not molten steel, it's aluminum, what have you, right? He's just getting at that. Yeah, frankly, died in 2016, RIP. So looking at the Pentagon, as you can see, there's a lot of stuff there, but particularly go look at this first real quick. So hold on. So looking at this, the Pentagon, right? Here are all the reasons why the Pentagon is a problem for the official story. No, I'm sorry. That's more general. These are the problems. Okay. These are the issues. So how could anything hit the Pentagon? What's with the shoot down order? Why only target a part of the building that was just renovated, that has no, only has civilians in it? And, instead of just going right from the top, just straight down, which would cause the most damage to the Pentagon. Instead, you do this weird corkscrew turn to come completely level with the ground to hit this one part of the Pentagon. I mean, yeah, right. Um, yeah, and how could that all be done by untrained pilot? To do a 277-degree corkscrew turn, or is it 300 and something? I forget. It's something like that. It's insane. So let's look at see, what was that back? And then we'll see the Pentagon. I know you must have saw this first. Seeing the Pentagon, yeah, don't worry, we'll get to that. But let's see first the plane debris, because people like to say, it doesn't look like a plane crashed here. Well, it doesn't look like a plane crash site, because it's not a plane crash site. It's the front lawn of a building that was hit by a plane. And so what you need to know is that the plane is inside the building. Okay. And yes, it looks like a perfect hole at the bottom, but that's because, one, it's not a perfect hole, because you see pipes that, right, crossing across the arc of the circle there, showing it's not a clean circle cut. And second, that's a lot of it is from kind of the liquid surface tension of things being shredded, and the jet fuel acting as a hammer and going through everything. And so the debris is in the building. So, and for those that say, oh, they never found evidence of the debris, well, we're going to look at some of that right now. Possibly not the whole video, depends how hungry I am, but we'll definitely, because people got to see this. It's a horrible thing that people think that the Pentagon, the problem with it is no plane hit it. No plane hit it. And let me make also certain about, people say the FBI took all these tapes. Absolutely true. Right. But it's not what you think. They took the tapes in order to cause and then they leaked the crappy one, the fisheye lens one, to cause this disturbance in people, so they could talk about this stuff and speculate about missiles and things. Essentially, because if you have a video of a plane of 77, a clear video of it hitting the building, you're gonna get no theories about missiles or what have you. So in order to prevent or to seed those kinds of speculations, the FBI confiscated all the tapes, so that all the clear footage showing it, and they took a lot of tapes that didn't show anything. They basically took every tape that was like in the square radius or whatever. Square radius, you hear me? In some radius around the Pentagon. It just took every camera, whether it was pointing that way or not. But anyway, so they took all the stuff that could have seen it, so that no one would be able to have a video of it going clearly, so that the speculation would foment. I mean, it's sophisticated. I mean, these guys aren't dumb. So the whole point of taking the tapes of the FBI was to basically further speculation, because again, if you have the tapes that clearly show Flight 77 hidden, you wouldn't have any soil, any grounds to speculate. But just do some detective work, and we see no, a plane did hit it, regardless of it. So yes, there is funny business going on, but it's not in the way that you were led to believe. I mean, these are, This is intelligence stuff, you know.
The 9/11 Truth Movement is all about finding the truth of what happened on 9/11. It is not fundamentally about pointing a finger at the government or the CIA or the military or the military-industrial complex, nor is it fundamentally about letting the accused Arab hijackers off the hook. The 9/11 Truth Movement is fundamentally about uncovering the evidence and following the evidence where it leads. The scientific core of the 9/11 Truth Movement has achieved a remarkable degree of consensus on the evidence that the twin towers of the World Trade Center were hit by large airplanes and that 3 buildings, the Twin Towers and Building 7, were brought down with some combination of pre-planted explosives and incendiaries. A lot of the early work on these issues was done by independent researchers such as Jim Hoffman, Stephen Jones, Kevin Ryan, and a large number of others.
More on Jim Hoffman later, and Kevin Ryan, more on him later.
A lot of this early work was consolidated by architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. As with any scientific enterprise, there were a mixture of good and bad theories. Bad theories, in other words, theories that lacked evidence or fundamentally didn't make sense, got weeded out along the way. It's all part of the refining process. A problem with a broad movement is that people who are not accustomed to the back and forth of the scientific method get attached to their pet theories and don't want to let go. This leads to factions and infighting and distracts from the search for truth. Fortunately, with respect to the World Trade Center at least, there was a solid core of scientific leadership. Demolition theories became well established, and other theories such as no planes, missiles hidden in pods under the planes, real-time video fakery, and the use of mini nukes and energy beams became marginalized by the scientific core of the movement. Finding the truth is a sifting process. Architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth adopted as a matter of policy to limit their attention to the World Trade Center. That made sense for them because they realized their primary expertise was in building structures. That focus is the primary reason we have as much consensus as we do on the issues surrounding the World Trade Center building destruction. Another reason for the focus is there is really no need to explain every corner of the 9/11 events. If it can be shown that there is insider complicity in the destruction of the World Trade Center, that means there is insider complicity at the Pentagon and whatever happened with the Flight 93 and the cover-up and the high-level coordination of the entire event because it was all one operation. A negative side effect of this policy, however, is that it left the investigation of the Pentagon without the same level of scientific leadership as was brought to bear at the World Trade Center. Was the event at the Pentagon caused by a large plane, a small plane, a missile, internal explosions, or a flyover masked by a smoke cloud accompanied by staged evidence? Rather than undergoing a healthy winnowing process, people form fixed opinions about one element of the event or another. False narratives emerged based on weak or erroneous evidence that became belief systems. Anyone who challenged these beliefs was automatically suspect. There has been a virtual absence of healthy dialogue and an overabundance of name-calling. Jim Hoffman, one of the most prolific early independent researchers of 9/11, was widely derided for his evolving understanding of the Pentagon event. He, like many of the rest of us, initially thought the impacting object at the Pentagon was not a large plane. He even entertained the hypothesis of a flyover when the idea was originally proposed, but later rejected it for reasons he has spelled out clearly. He presented on his website very early on the fact that the damage to the Pentagon wall was not the 16 to 20 foot hole that was seen on a widely circulated early photograph. The broad first floor damage was obscured in that photo by fire hose spray. No single photograph shows the entire first floor opening clearly, but a composite of the available photography shows an opening 100 feet wide with a single bowed column remaining on the left and 3 badly damaged hanging columns toward the right. An apparent column in the middle of the second floor opening turns out to be another hanging column. Several members of Scientists for 9/11 Truth took on the challenge of understanding the Pentagon event. Unlike the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, who made it a policy to focus only on the World Trade Center, Scientists for 9/11 Truth has as its focus all aspects of the 9/11 event that can be studied scientifically. We don't engage with topics like the State Department's interactions with the hijackers or the insider trading on Wall Street based on 9/11 foreknowledge, because that's outside our scope of inquiry. However, there is physical evidence at the Pentagon that can be studied. One member of Scientists, the late Dr. Frank Legg, was very productive on Pentagon research. He, in conjunction with Warren Stutt, investigated the flight data recorder and found that the data in the last 2 frames was not properly translated by the standard commercial software. Once the error was identified and corrected, the FDR data brought the plane down to the correct altitude to enter the hole at the Pentagon. Frank noted that although there was data drift in the position of the plane due to cumulative measurement errors, the direction of motion was precise. Sliding the path of the plane laterally to align it with the entrance hole put it in alignment with both the internal and external damage and the radar path. This gives us a good degree of confidence that the FDR data was authentic. It was this alignment that got me off the fence in recognizing the significance of the FDR data. Frank analyzed the claims by pilots for 9/11 Truth that in order for the plane to level out from its dive as it approached the Pentagon, it would be subjected to an upward G-force of 10.14 Gs. He found that this calculation was very much in error. The actual G-force would be anywhere from less than 2 Gs up to about 3 Gs, depending on your assumptions. Several years after Frank had done his calculations, I did the calculation myself 2 different ways and got results that agreed with Frank's. Despite our approaching pilots about the error, they refused to take their erroneous results off their website. I mention this to illustrate the lack of dialogue in the Pentagon research arena. I became involved with the Pentagon research when I joined Frank in a paper he was writing that analyzed the feasibility of the approach path of the plane advocated by a group that calls itself Citizen Investigation Team, or CIT. We jointly wrote 2 papers on this topic demonstrating that their proposed path, which conflicts with the damage pattern, both inside and outside the Pentagon, not only requires the assumption that all the physical evidence had to have been faked, but the path they proposed was physically impossible. It would have required very high lateral G-forces and unrealistic banking angles that were not observed by any of the witnesses. Pentagon research by members of Scientists continued, but it took a major turn when Wayne Costi undertook a systematic evaluation of the physical evidence. He was able to show in great detail how the damage to the Pentagon wall was consistent with a large plane and ruled out all of the other hypotheses that have been offered to date. Energized by his efforts, I and others have researched the affirmative implications of the physical evidence, culminating in a conference on the Pentagon evidence held in Denver in the spring of 2019. At that conference, Ken Jenkins talked about the psychological aspects of this inquiry. Wayne Costi and I talked about the physical evidence in and around the Pentagon. Warren Stutt presented his work on the FDR data, and John Wyndham summarized all the major theories advanced so far and assessed how well each one matches the evidence. John's conclusion was that only large plane impact rises to the level of a viable scientific theory. All of the talks, by the way, are available on the Scientists for 9/11 Truth website. This was a remarkable event for those of us trying to put the Pentagon research on a scientific footing, because it brought some of the key researchers together and we learned a lot from each other in the process. I would like to take the remainder of this video to explain my own research in the correlation between the FDR and the damage path, which grew out of the collaboration at the Denver conference. One of the most valuable researchers to have at the Denver conference was Warren Stutt, coming from New Zealand. He came a few days early, and we spent much of the time digesting the detailed analysis he had performed on the raw FDR data file. I was interested to know if the FDR data took the plane all the way to the wall, or if the last data point occurred just prior to impact. Warren was able to show the data went all the way to impact. The acceleration of the plane was forward as it approached the Pentagon, but the very last data point involved a maximum negative acceleration reading. In other words, we were seeing the effect of the impact itself. One of the big revelations, new information for Warren actually, was the photograph of the FDR as it lay in the rubble at the point of discovery. This photograph was included by Ken Jenkins in his presentation. What Warren immediately recognized that the rest of us had glossed over was that what we were seeing was not the complete FDR. It was only the memory module. This meant that the two parallel streams of data being written to memory were both terminated simultaneously and abruptly as the FDR was torn apart. This would be like pulling the memory stick out of your computer prematurely while it's still trying to write data. Warren realized this accounts for the exact nature of the data errors that were observed in the last two frames. The fact that the observed physical damage to the unit corresponds with the nature of the errors in the data in the last two frames is, if you think about it, evidence that supports the authenticity of the photograph and the data set itself. The data accords with the facts on the ground. I took it upon myself to try to understand in greater detail the alignment of the FDR data path with the physical path marked out by the light pole damage. The preliminary work on this issue was done by Frank Legg, who died in 2016. I was working with him and took his results as the basis for my understanding, but with Frank gone, I wanted to reconstruct his measurements so I would understand them in detail myself. Frank had pointed out to me that the path had to be adjusted for data drift. He had aligned the path with the entrance hole in the Pentagon and found that the plane represented in the data had flown through all of the light poles, hitting only the ones that were observed to have been hit and missing the others. When I attempted to reconstruct his transformation of the data, I recognized that the hole in the Pentagon, being fairly broad, did not locate the path precisely. I instead started by locating the right engine of the plane where it had gouged the top of a tree on the Highway 27 overpass of Columbia Pike. When I did that, I noticed that the right wingtip seemed to touch, or nearly touch, a pole holding a traffic camera that was monitoring traffic on Highway 27. It has long been known that there was a rung that is missing on that pole, and researchers have speculated that it was knocked off by the right wingtip of the incoming plane. Out of curiosity, I made the assumption that the right wingtip actually touched the pole to see if it would still hit all the other poles correctly. What I found was that, to the resolution of the Google Earth photograph I was using, the left wingtip either missed or barely hit the second light pole. I was discouraged by this finding, but when I mentioned it to Wayne Costi, he excitedly informed me that that resolved a puzzle about the second light pole. The pole was bent by the wingtip and knocked over, but not severed by the impact. That meant it had to have been grazed by the left wingtip. Once the path was shifted so the right wingtip touched the camera pole and the left wingtip barely touched the second light pole, the right engine went through the tree on the overpass at the right place. I then projected forward to the impact at the Pentagon. Just in front of the Pentagon wall was a generator trailer used for the Pentagon refurbishment project. It was hit by the right engine of the plane, and the left engine gouged out a shallow oval notch in a low concrete retaining wall a few feet farther along. I found that if I used the placement of the plane, determined by my first 3 points of contact, and the direction of motion of the plane, given by the FDR, the right engine hit the generator trailer at exactly the right place, and the left engine was correctly placed to take out the notch in the retaining wall. In other words, using the FDR for direction of motion and locating a single point where the right wingtip touched the camera pole, we have 5 precise points of contact to within inches. The precision of this outcome has significance far beyond mere precision in a measurement that was previously known to fair precision. The measured wingspan exactly matches the wingspan of a 757, and the spacing of the engines exactly matches the engine spacing for a 757. And furthermore, this outcome confirms that the direction of motion given in the FDR data precisely matches the motion of the incoming plane. If the direction of motion of the incoming plane were off by even a fraction of a degree, the alignment would not have matched. This detailed alignment of the FDR data with the points of contact on the ground is extremely strong internal evidence that the FDR data is authentic. There comes a point when the match between the data and reality is so precise that hand-waving claims that the data could have been faked are no longer believable. We have a very strong case here that the FDR contains an authentic record of the flight of the plane that hit the Pentagon. The significance of this finding goes even further. If the FDR data is recognized as the actual data for the incoming plane, then the entire flight path shown in the FDR data from Dulles International Airport to the Pentagon must also be seen as credible. That data gives us a continuous flight path that agrees with the radar path and rules out speculation of a plane swap along the way. That means the passengers who got on the plane at Dulles actually died in the Pentagon, and skeptics have less reason to doubt the authenticity of the extensive DNA database compiled in the weeks and months following 9/11. Even without the FDR, we have ample reason to believe a large plane consistent with a 757 hit the Pentagon. Look through Wayne Costy's presentation of the evidence at 911speakout.org for evidence of the size of the hole, signs of direct external impact damage, the presence of plane parts unique to a 757, and much more. Look at the direct visual evidence of the plane approaching the Pentagon elsewhere on that site. John Wyndham's conclusion that large plane impact was the only explanation that rises to the level of a scientific theory relies on evidence other than the flight data recorder. The physical damage, coupled with the radar data and the FDR data in general, led him to conclude that the large plane was a Boeing 757, and most likely AA-77 itself. What the recent detailed work on the FDR adds to the picture is the actual identification of the large impacting plane as American Airlines Flight 77. We still have to wonder who was controlling the plane. Was the flight path feasible for the presumed hijacker pilot to have flown? Were the hijackers themselves electronically hijacked? These are only a few of the loose ends. But recognizing that there really was a large plane impact and that the evidence points to the actual AA Flight 77 clears the way for ongoing research. It is just as important that the 9/11 Truth Movement nail down the evidence that challenges our own long-held beliefs, as it is to reveal government lies and cover-up. For our work to stand up to scrutiny, it's important that it be rigorous and impartial. Focusing on the truth liberates us, because it means we don't have to sell a point of view. The truth speaks for itself.
Beautiful. Now, speaking of seeing the Pentagon plane, we're going to see the Pentagon plane. All right, let's see the video here. Oh, shit.
In March 2002, 5 frames of a video from a security camera at the Pentagon were released or possibly leaked as small BMP images. The first of those frames purportedly showed the Pentagon plane. The remaining frames showed the growing fireball. Whatever was crossing the Pentagon lawn was in the distant background of a wide-angle shot and mostly hidden by a foreground obstruction, a post that, as it turned out, housed a second identical security camera. The most obvious feature of whatever was crossing the lawn was a white smoke trail that was hard to interpret. If there was a plane, why was there a smoke trail? Planes don't emit smoky exhaust. Missiles do. Also, how could a large plane, such as a 757, hide behind the small post in the foreground? The tail of the plane was visible, but without more context, it was difficult to identify it as the tail of a large plane. This image fueled speculation that the actual impacting object was a small plane or a missile. Compounding the confusion, the picture had an erroneous timestamp, added later during copying of the file, it turned out. It was not in the original. The lack of context and the small image size did more to sow confusion than shed light on what hit the Pentagon. 2 longer videos shot at 1 frame per second from the same camera and a second camera mounted in the foreground post were released in 2006 in response to a Freedom of Information Act request for surveillance videos that may have captured the incoming plane at or near the Pentagon on 9/11. One of these included the original 5 frames. Many people viewing these as still frames over the years, myself included, failed to see the plane. The lack of a clear visual image of the plane stirred speculation about what, if anything, actually hit the Pentagon. By the time the 2 longer videos were released in 2006, no plane at the Pentagon speculation was well established to the point that this belief was virtually synonymous with the 9/11 truth movement in many people's minds. There is a technique used in astronomy for seeing details in cluttered photographs.
Hold on, I want to see that leaked one again.
Housed a second identical wide-angle plane. Most of those frames purportedly all BMP, possibly leaked camera at the Pentagon, were released or possibly leaked as small BMP. In March 2002, 5 frames of a video from a security camera at the Pentagon were released or possibly leaked as small BMP images. The first of those frames purportedly showed the Pentagon plane. The remaining frames showed the growing fireball. Whatever was crossing the Pentagon lawn was in the distant background of a wide...
Yeah, that's how you know it's spooky. That's spooky, spooky, spooky. They released that little fucking shitty video so they could, you could tell that the people who set up 9/11 wanted us to bicker about the Pentagon, but not Building 7 or the towers. They failed spectacularly in that regard. They got their New World Order running, but people know it. People know they're liars in there. I love seeing Gen Z all about, like, that meme where, when girls go back in time, when boys go back in time, when girls, they see like their great grandma, like, but when boys, it's usually like to help some general or something. And so the one that I like is they go back to tell Bush 9/11's going to happen, or, and he says, I know. And it's not even that funny, but it's like, I'm glad that's the sentiment with the young kids, because that's the truth. Not so much that he planned it or whatever, but we were duped. We were lied to that day. I mean, just one thing alone is enough to cause pause, to say the least, is the fact that they stood 8 minutes in that room after this guy goes into his ear and says, we're under attack. You're telling me if we're under attack and you're just going to let the head of the country, who is probably being targeted, just to sit there with a bunch of kids? I'm not saying he had to run out of there, it was hair on fire or something. But he could have just got up and said, oh, presidential business calls, or shit, say he's going to bathroom. I don't know. It's just but he doesn't have to be all he doesn't have to frighten the kids. But the longer he stays there with them, the longer he's putting them in danger of being a target, because he is now a target given that they're under attack. So it's that alone shows that this doesn't make much sense, because if they're really under attack, the Secret Service would not care about these kids' feelings, let alone waiting 8 minutes. They would get them out of there immediately the minute they find out that something, we're being attacked. But no, it was all theater. It's sad. Anyway, let's go back here. Blink comparator.
Anything has moved or changed in brightness. Something discovered field in astronomy was well established in many people's minds. There is a technique used in astronomy for seeing details in cluttered photographs. Imagine a star field photographed with a telescope, then photographed again the next day or several days later. How could you tell if one of those tiny dots was actually a distant undiscovered planet? Unlike the stars that remain fixed, a distant planet would move. The problem is how to recognize the motion of a tiny dot in a cluttered field. Or what if you were looking for stars that vary in brightness? This is something astronomers study. But how do you go about finding the variable stars? Here are simulations of two photographs of the same star field taken a few days apart. The problem is to find if anything has moved or changed in brightness. One technique astronomers developed long ago is to use a device called a blink comparator. It allows you to alternate the view back and forth between two photographs. Let's try it. Do you see the planet moving? Do you see the variable star? You probably were able to see them immediately. Your eyes are attuned to noticing changes, so what changes stands out. This technique, by the way, was how Pluto was discovered by Clyde Tombaugh back in 1930. The image of the Pentagon plane is similar to the astronomical problem in the sense that we are looking for something against a cluttered background, and we don't know exactly what to look for. Ken Jenkins showed me that the blink technique is useful for seeing the Pentagon plane, so I implemented a JavaScript routine to blink full-resolution images on my website. But the same thing can be accomplished as a rapid-fire slideshow recorded as a standard video. Take a little time and examine the blinked images. Here's a zoomed-in view. What we see is fuzzy because we're enlarging a tiny pixelated image. I think you can see there is something that actually looks like the fuselage of a plane to the left of the smoke cloud. You can see the tail sticking up to the skyline. Now let's do the same for the frames from the other camera. Here the most obvious feature is the tail sticking up to the sky. You can also barely distinguish the nose of the plane to the left of the obstruction. Here's another blink comparison using one frame from each camera, showing the movement of the plane in the time interval between the two exposures. Note that the plane is both crossing our field of view and coming toward us, so the size changes. Also, the two cameras have slightly different points of view. Notice the details in the smoke trail. The undulations along the bottom edge of the short smoke trail can be seen in the longer smoke trail as well. The longer smoke trail is an extension of the trail that's already there. Notice how far the plane has moved in the time interval between the two exposures. The two cameras were recorded on the same recording device, so they were not simultaneous exposures. The film The New Pearl Harbor assumes without justification that the offset time between the two videos was 1/30th of a second. There's a pickup truck owned by Mickey Bell, one of the workers in the Pentagon refurbishment project, that is visible after the fireball. Wayne Costi has determined, based on measurements of the movement of the truck, that the time delay from one camera to the other was actually 4/30ths of a second. He did this by comparing how far the truck moved between two frames of the same camera, which is a 1-second interval, with the distance it moved and the offset time between the two cameras. Notice that the plane moves a little less than its own length in that time. Based on the length of a 757-200, Wayne estimates that the distance moved was about 106 feet, so the speed works out to be 542 miles per hour, which is in the ballpark with other measurements of the speed of the plane, but this measurement is independent of any other speed measurements. One issue that may bother you a little is how stubby the plane looks in these images. A 757 is long and slender. The plane is coming toward us at an angle, but it still doesn't look quite right. The plane is distorted because, as we can see looking at the wider picture, the whole view is distorted by the wide-angle camera lens. Note how the roofline of the Pentagon is curved outward. This is called barrel distortion. A number of image processing programs, like Photoshop, have the ability to correct for this distortion. I'm using an alternative program called GIMP. GIMP provides a slider to balance barrel distortion with the opposite effect, which is called pincushion distortion. Simply adjust the slider until lines that are supposed to be straight are shown to be straight. The result is the borders of the image are given severe pincushion distortion, but the image itself is flattened. This correction stretches out objects near the edge of the field, which were compressed in the original distorted view, so the plane looks more elongated. It's starting to actually look like a 757. Another question that may be lingering in your mind is, why is there a smoke trail? A number of explanations have been suggested. The right engine of the plane had moments before gouged the top of a tree on the overpass near the first light pole, leaving a circular gouge in the foliage with stripped stems remaining. The smoke we are seeing can be explained as the burning foliage in the right engine on the far side of the plane, which is what hit the tree. If we return to the image of the plane in the original 5 frames leaked out in early 2002, we can see that the original frames are identical to the corresponding frames in the longer version released several years later. There's no sign of tampering. If they were trying to sell the public on the presence of a plane that wasn't really there, they did a bad job of it. The smoke trail was not a selling point. It was a huge counterpoint to their message. The extreme subtlety of the plane image against the cluttered background, requiring special techniques to even see it, is not what one would expect of a propaganda piece. Also, as we've seen, there was complex interrelated information in the images, such as the motion of Mickey Bell's truck correctly corresponding to the speed of the plane, and the distortion of the plane image that was removed when the overall camera distortion was corrected. These self-consistent elements argue for the authenticity of the images. The bottom line is we have good reason to believe that we are actually seeing a large, fast-moving plane approaching and impacting the Pentagon on 9/11.
I want to show you one of the best websites. So this is like essentially the encyclopedia of 9/11 truth. This is like the Wikipedia of 9/11 truth. Whoops. Yes. This site is phenomenal. It's made by Jim Hoffman, who we saw before, who has the ponytail. And so you can see here on the leftmost column, there is a series of tabs. These are the main navigation tabs. These are auxiliary items, different talks, essays. Really, really good essays, by the way, too. Stuff like who was in charge of the security at 9/11, or what, like the things that could have been done to hide the explosives in the building, like what things, things people could have taken advantage of, all that. It's really good. Interviews, FAQs, resources. So when it comes to the main directory here, you can see from the background that what was there now goes across here, and then you can see that for each tab it gets broken down into these sub sections. So for background, for instance, you have you see the background of the World Trade Center, data, history, architecture, the different fires that happened, big fires that were larger than what happened on 9/11 yet. Those buildings didn't come down. That's actually where the movie Towering Inferno it was inspired from, was the World Trade Center fire of the 70s. So yeah, Pentagon, all that. Then you look at the attack here and see timeline, foreknowledge, preparation, flights, all nice and neat, all cited beautifully. Well, it's not a beautiful event, but just beautiful web design and what's the word? Just seeing everything organized, easy for people to read. So you can see. So for instance, each page has its references. All the references are cached, so you don't have to worry about broken links because everything has been saved. See, aviation, Trade Center, repressive policies, attacks on freedom, attacks on individuals, right? So that's the aftermath. Then we go to the actual evidence of the event, which I think is the longest one. You could see the missing evidence, destroyed evidence, surviving evidence, evidence in the Pentagon, different explanations of what we saw. So, for instance, the idea of other aircraft. Oops. The ideas of Eric Bart, whoever that is. Details about the approach. Destroyed evidence of the flights, missing, surviving. So that's basically the pattern it follows. Destroyed evidence, missing evidence, surviving evidence. Destroyed, missing, surviving. So very, very orderly, very almost like a library, just it's so well organized, so well indexed. It's just it's a beautiful website. It really is. Jim Hoff is a wonderful man who took this time to do this, and it's not like anyone's paying him to do it. And it's still up and it works, and I've never seen it go down. Never seen it say, come back later. It's a great website by a patriot, by a true patriot. Yeah, so let's look at misinformation. Let's see the red flags, right? This is all the bullshit they try to feed you. This is let's go back here to evidence, to missing evidence bodies. Just, a lot of people don't know this. So more than 1,000 bodies are unaccounted for. A little short of 3,000 people died. About 2,200, about 2,200, 2,100 died in the towers. Oh, I'm sorry, 2,800. Well, you see, I have to explain it here. So it's 2,800 people. Only 300 whole bodies were found. Those were the ones that were outside of the towers. Fewer than 1,600 people were identified. 1,100 people, and I think it's probably maybe a little less now, but over 1,000 people have yet to be identified in the sense that we've never found a trace of them. Not a single trace. And we went through that rubble with a fine-tooth comb when it comes to figuring out where the body remains were. They went very, very carefully through it. Very carefully. 800 victims were just identified by DNA alone. 20,000 pieces of body found. 6,000 pieces small enough to fit in a test tube. That's not gravity, right? 200 pieces matched to a single person. And then 10,000 unidentified pieces frozen for future analysis. So if you remember, a couple of days before 9/11, some news came out saying they were able to identify more victims. And you kind of like scratch your head like, what? Well, that's what it is. They have remains of biological remains, human remains, but they don't know who it belongs to because it's such a small piece of material, you know. So, you know, as DNA evidence gets better, they're able to figure out, you know, take less and less of a piece of material and figure out the DNA, and that's what's happening here. But I mean, you want to talk about a Holocaust, right? 9/11 was an American Holocaust. It was literally a burnt sacrifice. It was, you know, for the deep state and New World Order, you know, to bring in its overzealous national security. It's, you know, basically the national security, it could do whatever it wants. Yeah, that's what that was. That it was an altar to burn those poor people alive and kill them all, so that the New World Order could have its, you know, its security state. That's sad, man. It's fucking sad. But God is justice. God is pure justice, and there will be retribution on his part. There will be wrath from him. But also, this country is a good country, and we are a good people. We just trust our leaders too much. But we are not a bad people. Change, you know, change will happen, and people will, they'll be able to get their justice. One way, through God or through law. One way or the other, the justice will happen. And yeah. So anyway, it's a great website. So yeah, evidence, information. So you see here all the explanations they try to throw at you. Reactions. We have Miro. Then we got the analysis, which basically, as it sounds, looking at all different things, like the effects. So this is basically where the rest was more about describing different things. This is the one part of the site that actually gives like positive statements about the stuff. About, you know, this is a detective conclude. Well, I guess it's all detective. This is the part of the site that, you know, starts to connect the dots. And so that's what this site, this part of the site is for, the analysis part. I just want to say real quick, and one day I'm going to make this its own video, because it's important. When we look at conspiracies, we cannot think of like groups and such, even though that's who carries them out. Instead, we have to start with interests. There are interests to do something. Like, for instance, you may have an interest in robbing a bank. Let's say we all have an interest in robbing a bank, in the sense that we would all like money now, but not all of us have the same capacity to do it, and not all of us have the same mentality that would do it, like the, you know, motive. So when you look at things by interest and you start to see that, no, here's an event, there's an interest in someone lying about it. Why would they have that interest? And let's investigate that. And then through abduction, which is a form of logical reasoning, we're able to see if that explanation is more robust, is more, a better explanation than whatever, the official story is or whatever another explanation is. So you always want to start with interests. Then, so when we look at it that way, it's kind of like inversion. Instead of looking outward towards the groups, try to figure out like which groups. Instead, we just look at those interests and then work our way outward from that. And that's the best way to do this. So for instance, with 9/11, who has the interest of changing the security state or the capacities and how we react to emergencies and all that? Like, who has an interest in manipulating that? Who has a capacity of manipulating that? Who has the motive for manipulating that? And so on and so forth. So, great part here, as you can see, gets into all the stuff here. Steel shredding, frame shattering, concrete pulverization, demolition squibs. I mean, it's all here, baby. It's all here. And it's the only thing what was the one thing I didn't agree with this? The one thing that I don't agree that he has up here is the seismic evidence. I think the seismic evidence is legitimate. I don't think it's just stuff hitting the ground. I don't, maybe I'll end on that, the seismic, because it's something a lot of people don't see. But I was going to show some of the articles I have, the PDFs and such, that look at some of the peer-reviewed and other technical articles that look at 9/11. But I think I should say that for a part 2 to this video. And I was going to do the Organon stuff, but we'll just say next time, because I'm not going to be able to get to it. But in the meantime, though, I'm going to show you guys the what do you call it? The seismic evidence, because again, I promised to show you things that you're not going to see muchwhere else or anywhere else, and that's what I'm doing. So it could be that. Actually, we'll end on 2 things. First, the Flight 93 thing.
United 93 is with you at 350. Increment flight stop. United 93, check the M350. United 93, 350. United 93, the traffic view is 1 o'clock, 12 miles eastbound 370. Negative contact, we're looking at United 93. Somebody call Cleveland. United 93, verify 350. United 93, verify your flight level 350. United 93, verify your level of 350. United 93, Cleveland. United 93, Cleveland. United 93, the air Cleveland Center, I got, please. United 1523, did you hear your company, did you hear some interference on the frequency here a couple minutes ago, screaming? Yes, I did, 797, and we couldn't tell what it was either. Okay. United 93, Cleveland, if you hear the center, I got. For American 1060, a ditto on the other transmission. American 1060, you heard that also? Yes, sir, twice. Roger, we heard that also, thanks. I just wanted to confirm there wasn't some interference. Was that 956? Was that 956, Bill? I was just answering your call. We did hear that yelling too. Okay, thank you. We're just trying to figure out what's going on. Calling Cleveland Center, you're unreadable. Say again slowly. Center, did you hear the transmission where the airplane just said he had a bomb on board? Say again, was that United 93? Yeah, that transmission he said was unreasonable. It sounded like someone said they have a bomb on board. That's what we thought. We didn't get it clear. United 93 calling. Sector 956, that aircraft we believe was transmitting is 12 o'clock, climb 5 miles, turn left heading 225, I'll get you away from him. Okay, he's climbing, so I want to keep everybody away from him. Okay, I think we got him in sight. Well, the 1989, that traffic view is at 11 o'clock and 15 miles southbound, 41 timing, looks like he's turning east by heading 360. Here's the captain, we're taking the road to the main medium, on the board, and going to next sidewalk, and over demand, so remain quiet. Okay, it's United 93 calling. United 93, understand for the bomb on board, go ahead. United 956, did you understand that transmission? Affirmative, he said that. United 93, understand for the bomb on board, go ahead. United 956, did you understand that transmission? Affirmative, he said there was a bomb on board. And that was all you got out of it also? Affirmative. 93, go ahead. That aircraft you taking a hold of, is he turned to the east now? He's just turned to the east also. United 93, you're here Cleveland Center. Okay, American 1060 and Executive 956, we just lost the target on that aircraft. Okay, 956, we had a visual on him, just stand by. Do you have a visual on him now? We did, but we lost him at the turn. You can make a turn back to 220 heading, let me know if you can see him. Yeah, he's still there, we got him for 956. He's still there, northwest of you, about 25 miles? Affirmative for 956. Executive 956, fighting 180. So we're making a turn for 956. He appears to be heading right towards us. American 1060, do you see anybody northwest of you? Can you shoot back that farther? We're looking now, sir. United 93, Cleveland, do you still hear the center? United 93, do you still hear Cleveland? United 93, United 9 or true, do you hear Cleveland? United 93, United 93, Cleveland. United 93, United 93, do you hear Cleveland Center?
Do you see any activity on your right side, smoke or anything like that?
Negative, we're searching. Yeah, we do have a smoke puff down about, probably 2 o'clock. It appears to be just a dark cloud, like a puff of black smoke.
Speaking of witnesses of explosions, one of the witnesses was the Lamont Doherty Earth Energy Observatory, 20 miles north. And so these signals, seismic signals, were received. And FEMA and NIST relied on this report that was put out by them. So we have the first plane impact, and there are seismic signals that are received at about the time of that impact. So NIST and FEMA attributes those signal spikes to those very plane impacts. And that's true also for the South Tower, which produced a 0.7 magnitude seismic spike. But is that true? Are they due to the plane impacts? Well, the event happens at 8:46 and 26 seconds. But the plane impacts don't happen until 8:46 and 40 seconds, according to the NTSB radar that the 9/11 Commission relied on. That's 14 seconds later. So what could be causing those initial impacts if it's not the planes? And NIST claims the plane impacts actually occurred 10 seconds earlier. That accounts for a good portion of that. But they actually then go, they're still short 4 seconds. So NIST goes back and privately contracts with Columbia University, who runs the LDEO, in 2005 to get them to reinterpret their data. And they do, and they move back the entire seismic spike 3 seconds, much closer to the NIST's unfounded plane impact time. So that's the kind of science that we're working with here. Actually, it happens in the South Tower event also, where we have the seismic spike occurring at 9:02 and 54 seconds, but the plane impacts, according to NTSB radar in the 9/11 Commission report, only occur 9:03 11 seconds. That's 17 seconds. 50-ton hydraulic press gone. They made their way to the parking garage, but found that it too was gone. There were no
building got hit by the plane, and then the plane hit.
I think a bomb went off in the lobby first, then a plane hit the building.
The bomb hit the lobby first, and a couple of seconds in the first plane hit.
So bombs hitting the lobby, the basement, prior to the planes hitting. Lots of witnesses corroborating this, but also applied geophysicist Andre Rousseau says the frequency of the Raleigh waves attributed by the LDEO to the plane impacts were on the order of only 1 hertz. That's a very low frequency, but aircraft crash impacts have much higher frequencies, 10 hertz, often up to 100 hertz. That's 2 orders of magnitude higher than what was recorded. And yet they're attributed by the LDEO to the plane impacts. Not only that, but these frequencies, these higher frequencies, are actually filtered out by the bandpass filter used by LDEO, which only accepts frequencies 0.6 to 5 hertz. Rousseau says the range of the instruments cited by LDEO does not allow for the recording of such waves by crash impacts. The seismic equipment is designed to detect seismic events like earthquakes and explosions. Well, we also have the concrete floors, floor trusses, gypsum board walls, and the building contents concrete basement structure. So that's further deadened. They're equally distributed also over the entire World Trade Center analysis, the report that came out that has been made public. The start of the tower's collapse is at 9:58:59, according to NIST. That's 5 seconds earlier. So, well, he looks at a tripod-mounted camera, in this case, which shakes seconds before the collapse of World Trade Center 2. Let's watch. We're going to see the camera shake there,
right there.
And 3 seconds
the
later,
bread and butter of evidence. Where you have different lines of evidence that converge.
Building collapses. So these are tripod mounted, and you say, well, maybe somebody kicked it, but this is corroborated by other testimonies as well. In the case of the North Tower, we have the seismic spike starting at 10:28 and 31 seconds. We have this third tripod mounted camera shaking, corroborating with eyewitness accounts. And shake is coming up here very clearly, and then just like I said, like a train running under my feet, the firefighters, and then 10 seconds we have the beginning of the collapse. So some people have suggested, well, the 2.3 is not enough magnitude. Look at the Seattle Kingdom. It was only 4 or 6 stories tall, and it produced a 2.3 magnitude. Well, this is not apples and oranges, folks. Here's a 25,000-ton concrete roof, which falls and impacts the ground all at once. Very different from 4-ton structural steel sections pelting the ground over a period of 15 seconds. It's not the same. And so one of the beautiful summaries of this evidence is in the Consensus 9/11.
If you remember, that was the honorable mention that I gave. It's this website.
Work. David Ray Griffin, Elizabeth Woodworth, and others have put their hearts into finding the best evidence. Well, point TT7, why did the Twin Towers collapse? The seismic evidence puts all of this together quite well. And they rely heavily on the Andre Rousseau article of 2012, where explosives the source of seismic signals emitted from the New York on 9/11. And Graham McQueen's Did the Earth Shake Before the South Tower Hit the Ground, 2009. There are also other excellent works. Seismic Proof, 9/11 was an inside job. Craig Furlong and Gordon Ross.
So, here we are. We'll come full circle. This is the background I had at the beginning. Isn't that cool? That wasn't planned, but it's so simple that it has to be. That why would you expect anything else? Anyway. Okay, that's it. We'll do sometime later a part 2. I don't know when, but it'll be around. But yeah, it'll be a part 2 on the articles which no, I won't tease them now. But yeah, like I have a lot, like what you saw there. What you saw there before, those 3 articles that I have. We're gonna look at stuff like that and much more, and then also talk about the Organon, which is like metal work, you know. And I didn't get to any of that stuff, but it doesn't matter because this is my world. Not really, but it's God's world, but this is my YouTube channel. Anyway, so I appreciate you watching this. That's about it. Yeah. If any questions, you know, to comment, like, subscribe. You can subscribe too, but like, subscribe, share. Yeah, comment. All that stuff. Yeah, and follow me on Twitter. At meta_myself. Meta_myself on Twitter or X or whatever. Twix. Follow me on Twix on X. I don't care, man. You know, I'm not gonna get this guy. I've been using Twitter for over a decade, and he's gonna come around because he has more money than all these people, so the corporation has to sell it to him for the shareholders. And now he wants to change everything and turn it into a social credit fucking financial, you know, exchange app. I mean, please, man. And people are like, he's a genius. He's done nothing. He bought a few companies, man. His fucking parents were rich with emerald gold, you know, mines and stuff. I mean, it's a joke, man. This guy is such a, and then I gotta suffer his pregnant pauses. You know, it's like the guy's done nothing. He's invented nothing. He's built nothing. He's done nothing. He's just fucking bought stuff. That's all he's done. But I got to deal with people say, hey, free speech. He loves free speech. You know, I've been banned more than I've ever been banned before. And so, anyway. All right. I'll keep it rocking, keep it rolling, keep it moving, keep it doing. I fucked that up. Anyway, so thank you. And stop streaming. Or goodbye. Bye. Goodbye.